Here are the top big moments for President Biden in 2022. The president kicked off the year in January with a forceful push to change the legislative filibuster, which requires 60 votes for something to pass in the Senate in order to pass voting rights legislation in the face of Republican opposition. In February, President Biden kept his campaign promise to put the first Black woman on the Supreme Court. He nominated Justice Katanji Brown Jackson to replace retiring Justice Stephen Breyer, and she was sworn in June. President Biden traveled to Poland in March, a month after Russia's invasion into Ukraine, to make a big speech during which he declared this man cannot remain in power about Russian President Vladimir Putin. That led to efforts by the White House to walk back that remark. The president today is still working with allies to support Ukraine during the Russia invasion and has sent billions of dollars of aid to the country. In June, the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, which led to a series of actions out of the White House. The president immediately condemned that decision, and Vice President Harris has been traveling around the country for the last 6 months to meet with reproductive rights advocates and local leaders about abortion access. The president and vice president also used it on the campaign trail and encouraged Democrats to do the same and discuss abortion access with their constituents. In May, the president traveled to Uvalde, Texas, following the elementary school shooting.
The massacre at an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas, is the deadliest school shooting since Sandy Hook. Now President Biden is calling on Congress to do more than express thoughts and prayers.
When in God's name are we going to stand up to the gun lobby?
Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy made an impassioned plea for Republican senators to support gun control measures he says are common sense.
Why do you go through all the hassle of getting this job if your answer is that as this slaughter increases, as our kids run for their lives, we do nothing?
And it appears all eyes turned to Republican senators after the shooting.
When are we going to do something?
Golden State Warriors head coach Steve Kerr used his press conference to implore Republican senators to support measures like universal background checks.
Are you going to put your own desire for power ahead of the lives of our children and our elderly and our churchgoers? Because that's what it looks like.
Every time there's anything that comes up, they want to blame guns.
Oklahoma Senator Jim Inhofe wasn't alone in dismissing the idea of gun reform. Texas Senator Ted Cruz said in an interview that such restrictions don't work, and he pushed for more armed law enforcement at schools instead. Indiana Senator Mike Braun said he's open to finding common ground, including solutions not related to gun control.
There's generally a mental illness factor to it.
The president then a month later signed a bipartisan gun control bill, which is the largest gun violence prevention legislation in over 3 decades. In July, the president traveled to Saudi Arabia and now famously fist bumped the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. That fist bump led to massive criticism from Americans, and that visit to Saudi Arabia was already a controversial visit following the death of US-based journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Later in July, the president tested positive for COVID-19. That led to a wave of the president testing negative and positive again with rebound cases. As of October, the president has been triple boosted against COVID. In August, the president announced the death of Al-Qaeda leader al-Zawahiri. He was killed by a U.S. drone strike.
President Biden confirms the U.S. killed one of the most wanted terrorists in the world. Ayman al-Zawahiri was killed in a U.S. drone strike.
He carved a trail of murder and violence against American citizens, American service members, American diplomats, and American interests.
Al-Zawahiri was deputy to Osama bin Laden during the 9/11 attacks and took over as leader of Al-Qaeda after bin Laden was killed.
Justice has been delivered, and this terrorist leader is no more.
The Biden administration says the U.S. was tracking al-Zawahiri for years, and this year they confirmed his location at a safe house in Kabul, where he was staying with his family.
None of his family members were hurt, and there were no civilian casualties.
President Biden says this mission shows that despite U.S. troops leaving Afghanistan, the U.S. continues to conduct high-level anti-terrorism operations.
No matter how long it takes, no matter where you hide, if you are a threat to our people, the United States will find you and take you out.
And he was one of the top planners of September 11th. Later in August, the president signed the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the sweeping climate and tax bill that was supported only by Democrats in Congress. It was one of the president's top legislative priorities and was used on the campaign trail to help Democrats this midterm election. On September 1st, the president traveled to Philadelphia for a primetime speech on democracy. During that speech, he declared that so-called MAGA Republicans and former President Trump are a threat to the country.
Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic.
The president then declared another speech on democracy from DC just days before the midterm elections. And the president wrapped up his year celebrating a much better than expected result for Democrats out of the midterm elections.
In Maryland, Democrat Wes Moore became that state's first African-American governor, beating Republican opponent Dan Cox.
We had one mission, and Maryland, you showed tonight that if we stand divided, we cannot win. But if we stand united, we cannot lose.
In Vermont, Democrat Becca Balint became the first woman and openly gay person to represent that state in Congress.
I will carry your hopes and your wishes and your stories with me. I will stay rooted in our communities here in Vermont.
And Florida will send 25-year-old Democrat Maxwell Frost to the House of Representatives, the first time a member of Generation Z arrives in Congress. California also elected the first openly LGBTQ immigrant to serve in the House, Democrat Robert Garcia.
Leading up to Election Day, he traveled to Pennsylvania, New Mexico, Florida, New York, and Maryland. Republicans were not able to flip a single seat in the Senate, causing Democrats to hold on to the majority. And while the House flipped to Republicans, it was a much slimmer margin than expected. The president had one more victory in December when Senator Raphael Warnock brought the Democrats' majority in the Senate to 51 seats by winning the Georgia runoff.
It is my honor to utter the four most powerful words ever spoken in a democracy. The people have spoken.
Democrats can now ditch their power-sharing agreement with Republicans required in a 50-50 split. They also won't need Vice President Kamala Harris to cast tie-breaking votes as often. Nor will individual Democrats, like Senator Joe Manchin, have as much power to hold up or kill legislation. Schumer says despite Democrats' stronger majority, he still wants to bring Republicans on board often.
It is my intention to reach out to them and say how can we work in a bipartisan way.